Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. A warm welcome also from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, from FNF, from Rainbow Platform, who are organizing this with, and obviously also thank you to our partners for this session, the NEOS Lab. We are today here in sunny Vienna, in pretty Vienna. It's only my second time here, and I'm already amazed. And we are joined by some amazing speakers. Two of them are members of the National Parliament here in Austria. It's Yannick Schetti, did I get that right?
Yes.
Henrike Brandstetter. Yeah, that's right. And then we are also joined by Peter Berry, who is the political coordinator at the NEOS Wien Rathausclub. So we have two different levels here that we're talking about, being apart from everyone, also having the very unique experience and background when it comes to the engagement with NEOS, also in life. But we're looking at the national level, we're looking a bit more at the regional and local level, and I think we're going to have a great discussion covering different aspects. So Luis already mentioned it. Today we're going to be looking into the state of LGBT plus issues here in Austria, but also into the power of representation and diversity, which tends to mean different things to different people. So it's also going to be interesting to see how that pans out within this group. But before we kick it off, I think it makes sense to bring everybody a bit up to speed. And I would like to start with you, Yannick. You have been a member of the National Council since 2019 and are the NEOS speaker on LGBTIQ plus issues, among other things. And in past statements, you've reiterated the importance of preserving the rights that past generations have fought for. Could you give us a brief introduction into the state of LGBT plus issues in Austria in recent years, especially also in the light of populist forces that we've seen in Austria, but also in the rest of Europe, that have been thriving with issues like the pandemic?
Yes, so first of all, thank you to FNF and to the Rainbow Platform for hosting this event just 2 days prior to our Pride Parade in Vienna. So first of all, to put it in a European context, as a neighbor to Hungary and also to other European countries where we have a really bad situation, it is not that bad in Austria. So we achieved a lot in the past years. So looking back 20 years ago, there was still homosexuality part of the Austrian Penal Code, and to see what happened in the past 20 years is also a road of achievements and of success. But it was never achievement of the legislative, so not of the parliaments, but always of the Supreme Court, which made it possible for gays, for lesbians to access marriage, for adoption, and other discriminations put aside by the Supreme Court. So we have in Austria, on a legal level, there's quite a lot achieved. 2 years ago, and that's also maybe nice to mention because it's a liberal success story, we achieved to remove the ban on blood donation for so-called MSM, so man having sex with man, homo and bisexual man. So we achieved this, and this was part of our liberal campaign for 2.5 years, and then we achieved that this ban was removed. So on a legal level, there's really much achieved. There are small things to do, but on a legal level, Austria is quite good. We have huge problems in society, and they are for the first time in 20 years, they're rising again. So, of course, on a very high level, acceptance rates for equal marriage, for example, are on a very high level, but for the first time in 20 years, for example, hate crimes are rising again. And this is a huge problem also in the context of a far-right party, of the Austrian Freedom Party, FPÖ, which is leading in the polls right now with 28 to 30%. We have elections next year, and this party started 1 to 2 years ago to actively campaign against the LGBTIQ community. And in the context of this is a really huge problem we are facing right now, because we see in Pride parades, especially in Pride Month, that hate against the LGBT community is rising, and we are very concerned about that.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up with Enrique because, on the one hand, you're the NEOS speaker for women and gender equality, among other things. But also something that I would like to focus on with you at this point, in reference to what Yannick said, is that besides your political functions, you're also an author and have a long-standing background in journalism. And something that we have witnessed with the crises, like especially at the European level and different member states, is that over the years, the access to information and the role of media in safeguarding democracies and like pushing for liberal values, such as like promoting the LGBT plus community, it has been very important. How do, like especially in countries that have large rural areas, like Austria is one of them, how do you see the role of media so far in this? Like, have they been helping? Have they been like counterproductive or?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. We have a lot of media, a lot of newspaper in Austria still, but they are facing huge troubles, finance troubles. When you talk about media, you have to talk about the ownership. And the ownership in Austria, the Austrian media are owned by huge families or have a conservative background, owned by banks. Like there's a huge bank in Austria called Raiffeisenbank. It's a bank which is very near to our conservative parties, and they own a lot of media. So, but in Austria, the media, they can work independent. So this is not the question, but when you talk about representation of LGBTIQ plus people in Austria, about female issues in Austria, I think we have a lack there. This is because we don't have diversity in the newspapers, and we need more diversity in the newspapers. Journalists with different backgrounds, not just male, white, coming out of a wealthy family. This is a thing we talk about, and there are some little groups of journalists who start to talk about, but it's not a big discussion in our country.
Thank you. We'll go into more detail later as well, but I would also like to give Peter a chance to chime in on this, because as a bit of background for you as well, as political coordinator for NEOS in the Wien Rathaus Group, you manage the political processes within the coalition from the NEOS perspective. And as political advisor, you work on the fields of culture, science, European, international affairs, but also LGBTIQ issues. Being at the district level, which arguably puts you closer to the voters, maybe closer in terms of accountability and direct response as well, when it comes to seeing how these trends that we may be witnessing at a national level play out in the capital, which is very urban. Do you see any of these trends also happening here? Do you see different trends maybe also happening?
Thank you very much. I think there's sort of divergent trends. So on the one hand, in Vienna, we're making ever more progress on LGBT issues, both in terms of visibility. So, for example, a project that has been very important to us on the district level, on the local level, was introducing rainbow benches and rainbow zebra crossings to highlight that that the city of Vienna is very open, very welcoming to people of all backgrounds and of all sexual orientations and gender backgrounds. But at the same time, in the regional parliaments and in the local parliaments, we're seeing a backlash from the far right. So a couple of months ago, there was, for example, a drag queen book reading for children, where there was a protest from the far right saying this shouldn't be allowed to proceed, but at the same time, the more left-wing and liberal groups stood up against the far-right backlash as well. So we're seeing these fights being fought out on the urban level, these debates. But on the whole, Vienna is very, very welcoming and has been for at least 8, 9, 10 years, certainly, in the time that I've been living here. And we've seen a lot of progress in sort of societal viewpoints on LGBT issues. But it's something that does take up a lot of our time in Vienna. we'd spend a lot of political energy making sure that Vienna stays a very welcoming city.
May I just step into one point what Peter said, because I think that is a very a danger for us also as community, for us as Progressive Party, how we react to these far-right parties, as we see it in Vienna. Peter mentioned it, they were campaigning against these drag queen readings for children. And don't get me wrong, I think it's, I think that it should be, of course, possible without danger to go to a drag queen reading for children. But we should be careful that we don't shift the conversation on like talking about there's a human right on doing a drag queen reading for children. We should focus on the real issues. I think there's a human right to not getting beaten up in the streets. Yeah, and we should be very careful that we don't follow the far-right parties in shifting the conversation because, for example, the leaders of the far-right party in Vienna, we know exactly about why they're putting a focus on this. They went to the United States, they visited the think tank of Donald Trump there, and they tried to learn how to polarize the society. And they picked this issue of the drag queen readings, which is, of course, I think it's terrible that that there are protests against these drag queen readings in Vienna, but still it's not the priority issue for us as a party focusing on human rights. And we should be very careful that we don't let the right-wing parties shift the conversation away from the also important topics, but not the ones we should really discuss in politics.
Which is tough, no? Because like when we talk about advocacy or campaigning in general, if we look at the US where we have all this sensationalism and this polarization, we see that eliciting emotions and being like really polarizing with like the taglines that we use, that does work with many voters because emotions are like one of the strongest methods of advocacy.
Yes.
And liberal parties tend to be more like fact-oriented. Like how are the liberals in Austria like going against these kind of narratives without risking what you said, being pushed into this populist language and way of campaigning?
It's a question to me because it's a very difficult question actually, and if I actually don't have the answer to this because we're struggling with it in various issues. Also, if it comes to the discussion about migration, for example, of course, as a liberal party in the middle, as a centrist party, it's very uncertain for us to say just yes or no. It's always yes but or no but, right? And I actually don't have any answer to this question. It is very difficult, and it's getting even more difficult because this polarization we are seeing in the US or in UK, it's coming to Europe. And you can see it like Austria is always not only one step behind, but maybe 2 or 3 steps behind, but you can discover it in other European countries that these American trends are coming. And I think it's not good for society, this polarization. And I actually don't have answers yet how to tackle it.
We see it in the women questions like abortion. We have a new government in Salzburg. It's the far rights together with the conservatives. And one very important point in their program is, there are 2 points. One is we want that to promote adoption as an alternative to abortion, which is, it's incredible that they really want women just delivering kids for free to other people as an alternative to abortion. This is, I don't have any words for this. And the second point is, yes, we want to make a study about the reasons why women want to have an abortion. And I always warn to make these studies because this means that you need a classification. And when you start to have a classification about what are good reasons and what are bad reasons to have an abortion, you open the doors for these very conservative Christian movements coming from the United States to Europe and to Austria, and we have to take care and have been very aware of that. And that means that we have to go out to the people and we have to talk because they are so good in their argumentation, and really it's really hard to go out to talk to the people, to say, hey, please take a deeper look. What's wrong about yes, let's just start a study because, hey, we want to have evidence. We're a liberal party. We love evidence. What's wrong with you that you don't want to have any evidence about abortions? What's wrong? And then you have to start this discussion. And I wrote to the newspapers. I tried to educate journalists because you have to educate journalists too. And this is really, I think we work a lot, and then you have your normal work as a politician or working for a political party, and then on the other hand, you have to train other people about all these things. It's sometimes hard work, yes.
I think also there's an interesting parallel on both the issues of abortion and on the issues of integration and migration, is that if you say you want to reduce the number of abortions as your sort of policy goal, then one of the most important things you could be doing would be sex education. That would be very important. But of course, the conservatives and the far right are always going to be opposed to any form of sex education because sex shouldn't have any place in our schools. And when it comes to integration, you've got a similar thing. You say, okay, we have some problems with people across Austria, but particularly in Vienna, who have moved here, who've been here a long time, potentially even second, third generation migrants who don't speak German. Okay, what's our approach? We should increase German language education. We should fund organizations that help migrants, help people who don't yet speak fluent German to improve their German skills. Who will always vote against that funding? The conservatives and the far right. So it's in their interests to block any potential solutions so that they can have this sort of polarizing effect. And for us liberals, it's very difficult to say, at least particularly on the issue of integration, okay, we see some problems here, because then as soon as we do that, the far right are going to say, see, even they see that there's a problem, and they'll instrumentalize that position. But at the same time, if we want actual solutions, they're going to try to block them. So that puts us in a very difficult position as well.
But actually, I think the question you raised is very important, especially for us Europeans, for European liberals, to answer it quite quickly, because if we won't find an appropriate answer to this question, I think we will be getting lost in this polarization between the, I wouldn't say left and right, but in this culture war, right? And I actually am quite frightened. Don't get me wrong, I'm spokesperson for LGBT issues, so I'm very happy about when politicians are speaking about LGBT issues. But I was actually quite frightened by the fact that when Joe Biden renounced his campaign, that he will run again for presidency, I think in this video, it's 4 minutes or so, 1/3 to the half of the video, he's speaking about LGBT issues, about abortion rights. So don't get me wrong, I understand why he is forced to do so. But in a time where we have so huge challenges, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, inflation and so, the political debate is focused on these super polarized topics. And of course he has to do it because on the other side, you have a presidential candidate with Trump or DeSantis, like putting the main issue is talking about banning Disney from Florida, right? So it's a debate disconnected from the realities of the people. And I think this is a really, I think we have to find an answer to this question.
I mean, we've seen this also in Europe in some countries where issues that are important, like LGBT plus issues or women's rights issues, are often artificially elevated and polarized in national discussions in order to deflect from governments not working on other issues that should be relevant, for example. And that kind of hurts the whole discourse around LGBT plus issues as well, because we're not giving it the space and the time it deserves where we're actually trying to solve the issue, but we're like using it a bit as a scapegoat. Do you feel like that is happening in Austria?
Yes, of course. Whenever you talk, for example, during the pandemic, we did this campaign on the blood donation thing, right? And of course, it was one of the most common arguments brought. Don't we have more important issues to tackle? And my response is always, we should be able to tackle two problems at the same time. Right?
You're working so hard. You're so good.
But still, when this example of Joe Biden, I mean, he's presidential candidate, and it's such a huge topic in this U.S. politics for the top level, you know. And I do understand why it is so, but I think this is not really a goal for us in Europe to get this political debate, because it is putting so much more polarization in society. And and as I already said, I don't really have a strategy how we should answer this question, but we should work hard in finding a good answer.
I want to add another problem, not a solution. We have ultra-conservative people in all levels of government or representation in Austria, because it was about 10 years ago, these people said, hey, we have an issue, we have a huge problem because the world gets more and more liberal, but we have other topics and other interests. So we have to make a long-term plan and start to bring ourselves to all these positions in the ministries, in the National Council, even in local governments, to all these areas where some decisions are made. So, and they start to this moving, and now we have them everywhere. We have colleagues in our national parliament who are partly paid by movements, very conservative movements. They make money with them. They are lobbying for ultra-conservative ideas, and we have no answer for that. We don't have it because we don't have an agenda. We don't say let's stick on abortion. We don't say we want a more liberal rules or something like that. It's okay, the situation we have, but they say no, we want to stop to have the possibility to make an abortion. So they're in a very powerful, strong position, and we are not.
Peter, you were earlier talking also about that, like there are disruptors in the parliament and your colleagues have to like stand up to other delegates. Do you feel like they are just loud and not super influential, or is it a combination of both of these things? Because often right-wing movements are very loud, and that's like how they get more noticed, and they have very prominent figures, but what's the actual impact?
I think the challenge for us is, as was mentioned, Austria is generally, the people are not necessarily in a bad way, but just generally quite conservative and quite resistant to change. And what the more conservative and far-right movements achieve with us, because we're their sort of potential competitors, at least for the Conservative Party, in sort of the upper middle class sectors, they try to draw out positions from us that they know would be unpopular with some of our potential voters. And so that makes it very difficult for us to think strategically about, okay, how do we stick to the position that is right, the liberal position, without potentially scaring off voters, particularly if you compare Vienna to the rest of the country. So while in Vienna, on the Vienna level, we can potentially be a little bit more openly liberal and a bit more vocal about it, that could potentially scare off voters in the countryside who are just a little bit more conservative. And I think what they achieve is making it very difficult for us to find this balance, and then potentially taking some of our more conservative end of our voters away, which is, of course, if we want to keep, I think as liberals, we sometimes forget that we also have to go for power. If we want to make change, then we have to get votes, and we have to think strategically, and sometimes it's very difficult to find the balance between sticking exactly 100% to all of our principles and at the same time not risking then losing votes and not being able to implement anything at all.
We love to be the most intelligent person in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that may be a good point, because we're already talking about voters and we briefly talked about elections, and we've got a ton of those coming up. So like, I mean, there's Austrian elections coming up this year, and then there's the European elections coming up next year, which are both going to be very important for Austria, but also for liberals in particular, especially if we look at the current situation in the European Parliament. You got one MEP, maybe could have more down the road, but then those elections might also be a bit competing. Going back to the topic of our discussion when it comes to diversity and representation in politics, now we and the voters obviously also looking at like who is going to get elected, who are the candidates that are running, how representative are these, depending on who your voter base is. Those wishes might differ as well, obviously. But if we look at society at large and at how democracies are going to work to the best of their abilities, one thing is clear, like we need diverse representation, because the societies that are represented in parliament are super diverse when it comes to their socioeconomic background, cultural, religious, like gender norms, like everything is represented in society, but yet what we see in parliaments is often same. Like we talk about the classic middle-aged white men, people that are career politicians, etc. What I would like to focus on here is, on the one hand, how do you see representation in politics in Austria today, especially from a liberal perspective, and also from your lived experience? Maybe starting with Henrike, right in the middle. You have previously in other statements talked about the importance of integrity as part of politics as well, and for politicians to overcome their own interests and to create these benefits for society at large. One thing that is noticeable about NEOS in comparison to many other liberal parties in Europe is that there's seemingly a good level of female representation in the party. I mean, you got a female leader of the party, you got a female MEP, these kind of things without the use of quotas, which are still like heavily discussed among the liberal family as well. I wonder, on the one hand, does this female representation also translate to other levels? Or are we just talking about the most visible ones on the national level, like especially in rural areas where it is like historically harder to like mobilize people for politics in general, but also women and younger generations? And how does that work without quotas?
So we as NEOS, we had a time where NEOS was totally male. I think there was a time, even in Parliament, some months, it was 8 out of 9. 8 of 9. It was 9. It was 9 of 9. Oh, 9 of 9. 9 of 9. Wow. It was just one. Yeah, 9 of 9 male MPs.
5 years ago.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Yes, it was, and it was a problem because, but it was like an elephant in the room. Nobody talked about it, and there was a shift because more and more women came to NEOS and they said, "Hey, we have a problem. We have to talk about it." I was one of them, and then Beate became the party leader, and she is a woman. She has 3 girls, 3 daughters, and it was a theme for her. How can we build a party with a good representation of all genders without a quota? And we started. It was not a plan. We talked about it. It was like it grows. It was shaming and blaming. So yeah, it is. It's the truth. I can talk about it openly. We just started to ask groups that have no women, what's wrong with you? Why is no single woman interested in your work? Something wrong with you. So, and this was a learning process. And now it's really incredible not to deliver a diverse list for any kind of election. But we have a problem in rural areas, but we are not the only party who has this problem because it's work for free. Women they do the for free the work, take care about the children, all the care work. So and then add on to work for free in politics. It's really they can't do it anymore. So it's an all male thing to make politics in rural areas. To give you a number, we have there's a huge group of all mayors in Austria, and they have been very proud some month ago because they said, now we have 10% female mayors in Austria. And I thought, what's wrong with you? That means 90% are male. Yeah, you're proud of this 10%. So we have to work very hard to bring more women into politics. As NEOS, especially we show our female politicians when you are pregnant or when you become a mother, just take your time. Because in Austria there's no law that you have the possibility to take time off when you're a politician and you're pregnant or giving birth to a child. So we say, just stay at home or do whatever you want and take the time you need, because it's very, very, very important for us that we have female politicians and that they have the possibility to be pregnant and giving birth.
Which is very interesting, because in that case you're like family oriented and like family supportive, which like many like more conservative parties would advocate for, but you use it as an opportunity to like uplift them and like continue their journey within the party, which is really nice. Was there ever discussion about quotas in your party?
Sometimes, but it's not a big deal. I think at the moment we are growing. So when a party is growing, a quota is not a big discussion, because then there's a place for everybody. Yeah, I think maybe when we are facing different or difficult times, maybe we will start the discussion. I don't know yet. I hope not. I hope not. I hope to overcome this quota thing.
Do you agree?
I think what we have to look at is always sort of what's the goal of a quota? Is the goal of a quota just to have representation at certain levels? Because if that's the goal, we've managed that, at least for now, without the quota. What I think we're still struggling with is having this trickle down into our approach was always, if we have representation at the top, then more women will come and join as members. And we're still struggling with that. We still have a lot more, on the lower levels, we have a lot more male members than female members. And I think at that point, you have to look at, okay, are there cultural things? Are people organizing events that either women can't attend because they have other commitments, childcare commitments or whatever, or are they organizing events that just aren't particularly attractive to women? And we've had lots of discussions about this also when I was in the youth wing of the party. We had lots of discussions about which words are we using to advertise our events? Do we think that that's something that a woman's potentially going to want to come to or not? So I think a lot of it, and not just with regards to male-female, but in general, trying to have diversity within the party, whether it's on LGBT issues, whether it's regarding age, whether it's regarding ethnic background, or whether you're originally from Austria or not. You can implement however many rules you like, but I think if you don't have a culture that is welcoming, a culture that says diversity is really important to us, then you're never going to attract people who would then potentially fulfill these quotas. So I think that's got to be our approach. I think it often has been our approach. I think we do a lot. We probably, or almost certainly, don't do enough to tackle those more fundamental questions. And I think that's much more important, but a lot more difficult than saying, okay, we're just going to have a rule that we're diverse now and expect that everything else will be fixed by that.
You mentioned the youth, and that brings me back to you, because you're, among other things, also like the youngest member of the Austrian Parliament right now, aren't you? And you have been very active in UNOS, which is the youth wing of NEOS here in Austria. Do you see a special role of the youth organization also in recent years in pushing for these kind of things? Like, do they play an important part, and if yes, in which way?
To be very honest, I think that like UNOS plays a very important part within NEOS, but concerning the representation of women and men, we also had quite similar struggles with UNOS. So I wouldn't say that UNOS is avant-garde on this. So we have quite similar problems there actually, but I don't know the numbers right now. To stick to what Henny and Peter said, I really totally agree to what Peter said in the end. So I really believe that the most important thing is not quotas or a certain amount of representation, like 51, 52% or 49. I think really the most important thing is awareness at the top level of a party that diversity is a strength. As we know it from various studies in corporates, we know, for example, that on the stock market, corporations which are diverse perform better than corporations which are male and white and old. So on the top level, of course, like Beate or on the top level of a party, if there is a real awareness that we will perform better as a party if we are diverse. I think this is much more important than a quota on a certain level. Because especially, as you both already mentioned, we don't have a quota in our parliamentary group, but we have actually more women than men right now, right? So we fulfilled this 50-50 quota. But still, as Peter mentioned, and I really want to emphasize this, we have huge problems, not only on a rural area, also here in Vienna on a district level. This is very much dominated by men. So I think it's a very similar discussion to the quotas in corporates as well. What does it help us if we have 50-50 in the top management level, if on the ground and on the levels beneath there is like a 90-10 representation? And I also totally agree and want to emphasize this point. It's very much about a culture in a corporation or in a party. I talked quite recently to a coach on human resources about this issue, and he was advising NEOS actually, and he told me it's also about very basic things, like, for example, when does an event take place? Between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the evening. Like, this makes a difference. When do you set up an event, or you do it like now in lunch, in a bar? Exactly. And I wrote down this word Stammtisch. I don't know what's the English translation, but it means it sets up a feeling, men coming together, drinking beer, talking about politics, talking about women, talking about cars and sports and football. I mean, this setup is not attractive to women, right? So, and we actually have this. I just saw it a few weeks ago from NEOS on the district level, like Stammtisch with NEOS. And this is just, it's just about these basic things, and this is more easily to change than setting up a quota, because with a quota, and I think we agree on this, there are also connected various of problems. You mentioned I'm the youngest member of parliament, so you could also talk about the youth quota. You could also talk about the LGBTIQ plus quota, and for every part of the LGBTIQ community, you could talk about a quota. And you have this in some countries. I met the first transgender MP of Colombia, I think, came into parliament within a quota. So I think it's a valid argument. I don't want to destroy the discussion about the quota, but it's a valid argument. Where do you start and where do you end? Yeah, and
even when you have a quota, like on the gender question, like male-female quota, you can end up with 50% women, all in the same age, all white, all straight, so.
Which is an important point, because diversity is about so much more. Like, you got the levels of diversity that are sexual orientation, background, socioeconomic background as well. Like, we're talking caregivers, women or men that are like single mothers, single dads, which also exists, which we tend to forget about, these kind of things. But then also people are like personally diverse when it comes to their background. So that's a very good point indeed. Something that I would like to hear from you is actually, as two national representatives, one being a woman, which comes with its own sets of challenges. Like when we've seen like ALDE Party, for example, and European Liberal Forum have done extensive research into the situation of like online harassment and like safety or discrimination against female politicians. But also like you, for example, with the foreign national background, like is there a lived experience of challenges when being elected into office that you live? But also not only the challenges, like do you get some support from within your party system? Is there anything you can fall back on, or like positive practices that being part of the liberal family and of your party brings with you?
Well, sometimes it's a good thing to be an older feminist, because you have seen a lot, and when there are some citizens writing you an email and telling you the not nice things, yeah. I just ignore it. Really, I can't take care about any personal problems a dude has. So yeah, I think it's a good. Sometimes it's a good thing to be a little bit older and be relaxed. But sometimes it's not easy. So when you're on Twitter or Facebook, and then there's a wave coming up for just when you talk about female issues, abortion, etc., then I know in a second these people will text me without being asked for their opinion. Then we can, I don't know, we don't have a special system in the party who helps you, but I could ask for help. But it was never necessary for me, yeah. But I just, and sometimes I text them, I have some different texts that just to copy and paste, and I always tell them it's never too late for education. Never too late. There are courses where you can learn to say hello, thank you, goodbye, being friendly, and they're not very expensive.
Yeah.
So back to your question, I actually never experienced xenophobia, homophobia, really never within the party. And I'm a member of NEOS for now almost 10 years. So actually I really never experienced one of these bad events. And because of that, how do you say selbstverständlich in English? No. Yeah, it's normal. Yeah. It's just so normal to us, right? That there's no place for this within the party. Because of this, I think actually, by thinking about your question, we could do a bit better by implementing support systems. Because I actually, not because of xenophobia or racism within the party, but if you're on a certain level, of course you experience it with members of other parties or voters, yeah, in the internet, harassment, hate speech, and so on. And actually, when the first time, I think 1 year after I got elected, some of my speeches got viral on TikTok or so, there was really tons of hate within the internet, and I could cope quite good with it, but there was not really a support system. And actually, when thinking about your question, especially speaking of a lower level, on a district level, or it's on a regional level, I think actually this is a good takeaway of this discussion, to think about how can we implement such systems by acknowledging that we don't have real problems within the party, but of course in society they are, right? And for some of young politicians, young not meaning in regard of the age, but not that long in politics, that might be a very huge, burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To help them then when somebody tries to
with
silence them.
Yeah.
Sure, because everybody deals with it differently. Like, I mean,
Yes.
maybe as a seasoned politician, you can be like, I don't care about this, and I'll maybe send like a sassy message back. But somebody who just started might take it very personally and might
Right.
even like incentivize them not to continue on that political journey.
Exactly.
I mean, I hope like you've been talking about how you felt like you've had a very supportive environment as well within your party when it comes to these kind of things. Like Enrique, you mentioned, like if you needed to, you could reach out to other people, and that's already a big deal to have this like openness within your party. But indeed, thinking about maybe there is a need for support systems. Also, in our work at FNF, for example, we have female empowerment programs at the European level of our party. But one question that comes up a lot is like, we empower women, we empower minorities till the moment they get elected.
I want to say something. Yeah.
And then once they're in office, they're like suddenly there, and like most of the programs stop. And then that's when many of them encounter like more challenges.
But there's something wrong with this program, because why do I have to empower women? That means that the male point of view is the right one, and we have to empower women so that they can deal with this point of view. And this is, I think, we have to think about, maybe we have to rebuild these empowering women courses and systems. Because there's something wrong when I have to help the half of the society to deal with a system which was built by men and is run by men.
And we need men.
So we have to
change
the system.
I mean, that's always a very important part of it as well. Like, yes, we can empower women. There is a point to it to empower women in a certain way, because sometimes women are just more hesitant in a system that's not built for them, to just show that there is a sense of community and support that they may not have at a local level. We're looking especially at like legacy parties, like we're looking at countries like Germany, like the Netherlands, etc., where a lot of the political merit is built on how long have you been in the party. Yeah. Now it's your turn to be the next one elected into parliament. These kind of things there, we maybe see a bit more the need to give women this push of community So they have maybe you're the only woman in your whole region, in your political party, who's going to promote you? Really, all of it needs to be comprehensive. As you said, like nothing's going to change. Same thing for quotas. Like a quota in itself is not going to solve it. Like if the environment doesn't change, and you don't have comprehensible approaches, we need men as being part of this. We need to like unlearn and unthink like systems that were built by and for men when it comes to political parties. That is certainly very important. Peter. As a man.
As a man. No, I mean, there's been so many different things that have been said. But one thing that I'd perhaps want to bring into the discussion, which is perhaps unique about NEOS in Austria, but for every other party in Europe would probably be normal. So in Austria, the established parties, particularly the two main established parties, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, they have very complicated, broad structures designed to push people from different age groups, genders, backgrounds, locations, all of these different things, whether in the Social Democrats, it'll be, okay, are you in the union? In the Conservative Party, we need to make sure that we've got enough farmers, we need to make sure that we've got enough people from industry and so on.
Too many farmers.
And as NEOS, we said, what's very unique about Austria is that after the Second World War, the country was essentially divided into two, between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats. They just sort of, they all got their different areas of influence, and we came along and said, we think this is a bad way of running the country. We want a country where politics isn't just fighting between two fractions, but instead having a proper debate and having evidence-based policy. Which is partly why we then always said we don't have a quota, we don't have these organizational structures in the same way that the other parties do, because we thought that had been damaging part of it was very important for Austria's history, but part of it has been very damaging in getting reforms passed and having a political system that can implement change. So I think this has always been very important for us as NEOS, or for our understanding of ourselves, that we don't want to have that sort of structure, which then of course makes it difficult for people to find support systems which cater to their particular needs, whether it's women, whether it's people from an LGBTI background, whether it's, I think a big problem that we have as NEOS is that we're heavily academic. We don't have that many people who don't have a university education. And on the one hand, we don't want these formalized structures, but on the other hand, now we maybe need to come up with another approach on how to support people who are in some way not just the mainstream of NEOS politicians.
Because I invite for a lot of, I'd call it just women breakfast. I'm traveling through Austria, and I invite women to have breakfast together with me, and we talk about everything. And what I see, NEOS is really, women are interested in NEOS. They want to be part, they want to maybe become a candidate, they like us. Women like NEOS, sorry. But I can't offer them anything else. Just, I'm here for a breakfast, and then I take a contact, and I'm just a single person, so I can't take care about everybody who is interested. So we have to build a special ladder of engagement and things like that. But we start to work on that because we see that we need to build something where people can become part of it, and it's not party, yeah? Because to become a member of a party is a very big thing, and we need some steps before, and we have to offer them, But we will discuss it tomorrow.
Yeah. Like a soft launch.
Yeah, something like that, like a network or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Like a NEOS friendship circle.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Great. One thing, because we were talking about voter retention and like attractiveness, one thing that is quite recent that falls within Peter's field is actually the case of tensions between City Hall and NEOS and organization like civil society, like with the Pride organization. Because while these kind of organizations tend to like not want to be political, like party political. In that sense, they do often depend on public funding for these kind of things, like for pride parades and activities. NEOS does have a long-standing commitment, like with the LGBT plus community, etc. Do these developments, like maybe you also want to elaborate a bit on them, but like when there are comments by public organizations that kind of like then undermine maybe a little bit that commitment, how do you navigate that? Like, does that fall back on NEOS? Or like, are you confident?
That's a very challenging question. So in Vienna, our deputy mayor within the coalition government in Vienna is also responsible for LGBTIQ issues. And we've made a lot of progress on a lot of things. We're going to be opening a queer youth center next year. We've increased funding for various other organizations. But yes, there were some difficulties with some more established organizations that, so as I was saying before, as you were saying, they're perhaps not officially linked to a party, but there are a lot of connections to parties, which we as a young party, we don't necessarily have the same level of connection or the same level of having put our people everywhere, which the other parties have got a lot more experience in, which can sometimes lead to challenges. I think the broader community is very aware of the fact that we've always had a very long-standing commitment to LGBTIQ rights, and that we're doing a lot in Vienna. There can sometimes be challenges with individual organizations, which you then just have to deal with as they come up. But that's part of being in government, is that sometimes you make difficult decisions, and sometimes you can't always please everyone. And I think this is something that we're learning as NEOS, because we've not had very much government experience so far. But yes, you have to make sure that you have your commitment to certain issues, to certain organizations, but you also have a broader commitment to all voters, and you have to navigate sometimes this challenge of finding the right balance.
Peter's preparing to get a diplomat.
Very well said. Now your real opinion. Actually, at this point, I would like to give you a bit of like a wild card round. So if there's any issues as part of this discussion that you'd like to raise that I have failed to touch upon so far, like, or that are important to you as part of this discussion especially, like, shoot, feel free to raise them.
Maybe I would put a point, because we spoke quite a lot about Vienna, and an issue I think where, especially in migrational societies as Austria, as Germany, for example, we have a huge responsibility also as a liberal, as a centrist party, by talking about the following issue. So Henrike already mentioned we have lots of issues with the, I wouldn't especially say far right, yes, also with the far right, but in the past especially with the extremely strong Catholic influence on anti-LGBTIQ legislation. And they're really quite powerful in Austria. Not a lot of them, but they are in a very powerful position. So the chief of, chief of cabinet of the former chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, he was associated with the very, very clerical Catholic associations. So we have issues on this side, and as a Liberal Party, we do speak about them quite a lot in Parliament. But we are also, I think it's also very important, especially for us, to not be blind also on the other eye. And we have lots of issues also with rising homophobia, especially speaking of Vienna, in district with a high percentage of citizens with a migrational background. We have recently seen studies that among young, especially men, as so often, but among young men in a second, third generation with a Turkish background, for example, or with a Syrian background, or with an Afghan background, that their positions on European values are really, we have to worry about this. Like, for example, in the third generation of the young Turkish man, 1 out of 2 says that he had a big problem if in his family somebody would get out as gay or lesbian. Or that they have a big problem if they see a lesbian or a gay couple holding hands in the streets. And I think it is, of course, a very sensitive topic because the far right always does instrumentalize these kinds of things for their purpose. But I think if we want to tackle homophobia really, then we also have to be honest. And especially on the left side, the Green parties, the Social Democratic parties, they don't want to talk about these issues because these does not fit in their black and white scheme, right? And this is maybe an issue we didn't talk about that much today, but a focus we put on when we talk about fighting homophobia and transphobia.
Okay, very interesting.
I think I would just like to add to that extends beyond the fields of homophobia and transphobia. You have a huge problem in, I think, Germany and Austria with rising anti-Semitism as well, but also just generally a rejection of fundamental European values within various communities. And I think as liberals, we have to be able to stand up and say, no, these are our values. We stand up for them and we will fight for them. And whatever your background, whether you're white Austrian Catholic or whether you're from Turkey or Syria or Afghanistan or whatever, there are certain basic principles that we all have to respect. And if you don't, without compromise, and if you don't respect those, then we have to find a way of dealing with that. And I think as Yannick was saying, the left wing has far too long been sort of turning a blind eye to these things, to these problems. When they arise in migrant communities, they come from Austrian Catholics, then they'll always say, they'll always speak up, as do we. But I think we have a broader responsibility to fight for the things that are liberal values and liberal achievements from the past 200-300 years post-Enlightenment.
Hello, patriarchy. Austria is the shared European record holder in femicides. So no other country has this huge amount of killed women because they are women, because of their gender. And I try my best to talk to our Ministry for Women Affairs about these incredible situations, and we really have to do the base work because we don't even have a definition of femicide in Austria. So we really have to start to work on the ground level to fight these femicides. It's really a huge problem, and besides femicide, we have a huge problem with violence against women. So this is because we are a very conservative country, and we have to change the society and the system to fight this huge wave of violence against women. Yeah.
And just to add to that, one sort of symbol for that recently was the Turkish elections, where we saw within Europe very different results within the Turkish communities voting in their countries, and Austria had one of the highest rates of people voting for Erdogan. So it's not just a case of, which is sometimes argued, that we're importing conservatism from a country that's exporting conservatism across the continent. For whatever reason, something we're doing wrong in Austria is that either we're attracting those who are more pro-Erdogan and more conservative, or we're making them be like that in some way in the Austrian system. And I think that's
the feeling that it's normal.
Yeah, because we were already a conservative country to begin with.
I mean, one thing that certainly plays into that, because it's also an issue, for example, in Germany, that a lot of new generation, especially, so we're looking at second, third generation Turkish voters would vote for Erdogan, is because in conservative societies like Germany and Austria, there's a big point in integration, and in the very past it was not integration, it was more like assimilation. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the parents of Turkish guest workers, etc., that came to rebuild the countries, their point was our kids need to integrate in schools. They sometimes don't teach them the languages. Mm. There's a lot of identity crises among younger generations, second, third generations, that are then like easier to harvest from these like populist sites. So like it does interconnect when we look at our conservative societies and how that has enabled over time. Nowadays we talk about integration very differently, but that's going to affect future generations down the road.
I agree.
Maybe bringing it back to representation in politics, because I think we could talk about this all day. Actually, we've got a lot of downs, now I want more ups, because we cannot have the conversation end like this. So I would like you to briefly think about one challenge and a possible solution that we've thought about today, because you guys have come up with some pretty decent ideas on what could be done within NEOS or like in general in order to further representation in politics or create stronger networks and support networks within NEOS. So maybe like one challenge, one solution, and then hopefully you'll work on that after the event.
Concerning our party or like general in politics?
On your party.
On your party.
Make it a bit harder.
So actually, I will really take this point away with me. We spoke about like establishing support systems or have a little bit of funding for it. I mean, you have to start slowly, right? But raise awareness that if you get into a political mandate or in a position, that it might not be that easy for everyone, especially on lower levels, to deal with hate speech in the internet, with with just bad emotions, right? Actually, we have nothing like this within the party. And when speaking about this, actually, it's not good. So I will take this one away.
It's not that hard.
It's not that hard, right? Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool.
I'm a proud feminist and I support women wherever I can. But I need support because I can't do it all on my own. Even when there's a woman coming, I'm interested, maybe I become a candidate or want to become a member, I'm working so hard around her that she's becoming a member or becoming a candidate. But I'm just one person, so I need more support, I need budget, I need a structure, and need support to make something like a network that we become better and have more women on board, because as I said before, 20% of our members are female, 80% are male. So this is what I need, or what I think we need, to be more attractive for women.
I think one challenge we have is that the only diversity that we really know about within NEOS is we know gender balance, we can quite easily work out age, and we know where people live. Beyond that, we don't know anything about our membership. And I think a big challenge for us is if we want to become more diverse beyond those three sort of basic factors, then we need to find some way of actually finding more out about our members and collecting this data. And I think you can't, as liberals, as evidence-based sort of policymakers, we always say we want to work on the basis of data. And if we don't have the data, then we need to find a way of finding out more about our members and then potentially introducing routes to increase diversity within the membership. So I think that's something that we should be looking at. There's a lot of different ways of finding out this data without sort of making people out themselves, or you can do it in an anonymized way or a pseudonymized way, but to have some sort of measurement of how we're doing and measuring our progress.
These are all great ideas that I hope will be followed up with at some point. It's also worth mentioning that all of these ideas are scalable. So like some of these things you may like be able to try them out on like a local level or like in whatever initiative where it makes sense and like see how it goes. Or if there's other ideas. I mean, there's always great ideas coming from the community as well. I would like to take this point to thank you very much for participating in our program and sharing your insights and sharing your experiences with us. And I would like to conclude the event. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.